Good day, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Kayode Eti. For those of you that are going to be watching my video for the very first time, I'm a safety trainer, safety and security trainer and consultant. So I made a four episode video on how to pass the IG2 practical of the Nebosh IGC program. And I got a lot of comments on YouTube, WhatsApp messages, uh, um, as regards making a video for the open book exam. Okay, so there's a lot of things to say about the open book exam. That's the IG1. But after listening to questions, reviewing the questions myself, getting feedback from a lot of people, getting questions in class while I do trainings, I was able to, even answering the questions myself, I was able to piece up the different loopholes together. Though we've only had four exams for this open book so far, but I've been able to piece up, different ideas from different places and actually came up with one that sticks, right? There's one very good technique that I see or I've seen that can simplify the entire thing for you. So basically what I want to do in this video is show you how to apply that technique. However, the thing is, there are a few things you need to know before you apply that technique, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 5 tips on how to pass the open book examination, how to pass well. My very last tip, which is the 5th one, is the most important one, is the key that I have. However, it's not going to open any doors, or in this case, help you pass the exam if you do not understand from the very first one. So, excuse me. As usual, if you have any questions, you could always drop it in the comment sections. If you have any contributions in addition to what I've been saying, you can also drop, because people are reading and would like to learn from you. So let's just go right into it. I want to make the video as short as possible. So I'm going to start with a few technical point. Your exam, the open book exam, is going to be a scenario-based exam. Basically, what that means is they are going to paint a picture of an organization, and then they're going to ask you a series of questions based on that organization and expect you to use your answers in relation to that scenario. So just expect the scenario. It doesn't matter what organization the scenario is from. It's going to be one scenario and then a series of questions. Now, as regards the number of questions that you would get, we've seen different number of questions over time. We've seen 10 questions, 7 questions, 8 questions. But the most important thing is, no matter the number of questions, it's definitely going to sum up to 100 marks. So some might carry 20 marks, some might carry 15 marks. And the cutoff mark, the minimum mark required to get a pass, is 45 out of the 100. I know a lot of us just aim for the 45 so that you let my people go, but I've seen cases where people just want to do that and then they eventually just, they fall short of even the 45. So you have to be very, very careful. I'm sure, very, very sure that after this video, if you pay attention closely, it's going to reduce your tension as regards the exam. And then also you're going to be able to get a few points in addition to what you must have gotten from your instructors to help you in passing this particular exam. Okay, so I'm just going to go right into it. Remember, I said I have 5 tips, 5 basic tips that could help you with passing the OBE exam. Okay, so my number 1 tip is the scenario. What people do not know is they don't know that the questioning or the exam actually starts from the scenario. For example, I noticed that people do not pay attention to topics as they read the scenario. Number 1, first, you need to read to understand the scenario. Do not start reading with the intention of answering questions immediately, right? So some people just want to, read one part, go back to answering the question. No, because when you do that, you're going to miss some certain point that in that scenario. So what I want you to do is, I want you to read the scenario like there's no question. Read it like a summary, an essay, and read it to understand it. What exactly are they trying to talk about in that particular scenario? And as you're reading, be taking notes of different topics. So if I was reading a scenario and then they talked about how the organization is made as a benchmark for other organization, it has good safety practices and all of this reduce accident, reduce incident, then I know, okay, we're discussing health and safety culture. When they say that the organization wants to go in contract with these, they have contractors working, I know that there's a topic contractor relationship that particular area is talking about. When they say that they are issuing permit to work, the workers are using GSA, they're about to develop a risk assessment. If you look at these different paragraphs and this different in the scenario, you're going to find out that you find your topics in there. They talk about communication, you talk about different training. So that would also make it easy for you to understand the scenario as you go. So I read this scenario, and also, after reading the scenario, you need to form an opinion about the safety culture of an organization. Because so far, one constant question has been the culture of the organization. One very constant question. So as you're reading the scenario, you make sure that you also take note of the safety culture. Now, we've seen cases on the October exam where the organization had totally negative culture. Then came the scenario about the pandemic. They had a positive culture, and then there was the last exam that had both. So the organization had a lot of positive culture, but then towards the end there was an accident on site that was as a result of a couple of negative indicators to safety. So basically just pay attention to the polarity of the culture of that organization. Is it one of a positive culture or is it one of a negative culture? So that rings in your head when you're trying to relay your answer. Remember, we've not started answering the question yet. We're just taking our time to understand the scenario itself. And like I said, we have already started our exam from understanding the scenario. So when you get to the part where you start answering questions, it comes straight to you. And that thing you also need to know is, as you're reading, be taking notes of different paragraphs apart from the topic. Because from experience so far, you find out that each question is talking about the paragraph in the scenario. It's talking about a line in the scenario. So if you pay attention to the scenario, you can easily go back there. When you talk about linking your answers to the scenario, we'll do more about that later on in this video. So you just make sure that you fully understand the scenario. However, as you're doing that, do not get carried away by the scenario. See, like I said before, they might paint a totally negative organization. They might paint a totally positive organization. Do not get carried away. What do I mean by that? Some people get carried away by the culture of the organization, that for every question they get, they just try to start forming solutions. They try to start giving solutions when they have not asked you for solutions to the question. For example, the sample question that was given to us before the August exam, it was about the car park incident. There was someone was reversing, there was poor lighting in the car park, there was space constraint and all of that. And one of the questions was that we should try to convince the management team to investigate incidents. Some people said, when I go into class and use that scenario, some people just answer, they forget that we're just trying to talk about the factors that could encourage incident investigation. Basically, they just start to say they should have proper light, they should ensure that there's enough space. So don't bring solutions when they've not asked you for solution. Make sure that when it gets to the question aspect, also you focus on the question. Don't get carried away by the scenario. Remember, we're still talking about the scenario.
Okay, so one last thing on the scenario is actually the different concepts. So I've seen cases where some scenarios there's one that talked about the pandemic, there's one that talked about the behavior-based safety. Anyways, if there's any concept in this scenario that you're not very familiar with, you can just take 5 minutes to Google. You don't have to like go and study the entire industry. It is just there could be a particular concept you're not familiar with. Now, why is that necessary? That is necessary because when you just take 3 minutes to read through what they are talking about, you would be able, your understanding of that is going to reflect in your answering. But if that place is still a gray area, you're just going to be answering the question, repeating the same words and words and words over and over again. So if there's any concept you still do not get, please make sure that you do a little research on that to help you, understand that scenario even better. So that's that for our point number one. Again, I said we should make sure we read to understand the scenario. As you're reading the scenario, make sure that you point out the topic areas, topics from your syllabus. Remember that this exam is still focused on element 1 to element 4. So as you're reading, be picking that out. That would help you when you're trying to sort out for your answers. Also, be looking at areas and paragraphs. If you printed a copy of the work to use, you can highlight or do the highlight on your systems also. And then understanding of concepts. So that is that for point number one. Now let's go to point number 2 or tip number 2. Let's put it that way. My tip number 2 is understanding the question. Now, this is one area that I think people actually need to really pay attention to. All right. So after reading to understand the scenario, let's go to the question. Now, one tip that I have, that's a tip of a tip that I have for this particular part is that you need to understand, like I said earlier, that this exam is focused on part 1 to part 4, element 1 to element 4 of your IG1 syllabus. There's no way the question is coming outside this box. What that means is every question you ask or you are asked can be related to a topic from element 1 to element 4. However, because of the exam style, they're not going to just walk up to you and say that what are the types of communication, what are the communication skills, what are the methods of communication, what is the advantage and disadvantage. You rarely or almost never get questions like that. They are just going to paint you a picture and then ask you to provide solutions. So it's more like you are applying it. It's more practical. That's the entire idea of the open book exam in the first place. It is more practical. So don't expect straightforward answers. However, you can decipher the questions to mean just that, right? So for example, in one of the past questions, there was one of the questions said that we should use financial, I think it was the August exam, we should make financial justifications to help with the segregation of forklifts, financial justifications of why the organization should, implement our recommendations that forklifts should be segregated from pedestrians, right? Now, that question could simply have been, what are the financial reasons for promoting good health and safety, right? In that particular exam, there was still a question that talked about the reasons why, or what are the factors we think could have influenced the young forklift driver. Basically, that could have been, a question could have simply been, what are the individual factors that influence people's safety? And the number 8 question, the next question was about the management also. So all of the questions can simply be asked without the scenario. That's my point. So the very first thing you should do is look at that question and imagine there was no scenario. Forget all the stories around the questions. First, forget all the stories around the question and then decipher that question to mean something from a topic in element 1 to 4. If you are not able to do that, it means you've not fully understood that question. So some questions come really straightforward, right? Like when I just said, like when they say what do you consider when you want to select contractors? What do you consider when you want to, for first aid arrangements? What are the difference between audits and inspections? What are the advantages of external audits? All of this. What's the importance of management systems? All of this comes straightforward, right? But there's some questions that are really, really
they are twisted, for lack of a better word to use. Okay, so you have to be very, very careful with that. So make sure that you link the question, or you're able to link the question to something from the syllabus first. One thing that can help you with that is the task, right? So you must have seen the past question. For every question, there's a task aspect. That task could also direct you to what module in your syllabus that question is coming from. That will take you to the area, and then you now dig deep to find the answers to the question. So that's one thing you should do first. Understand the question. If you do not understand the question, or you fail to understand fully, which is also a very common one. There's some questions that look straightforward, but there are actually two questions in one. So what you end up doing is, if you do not understand the question at all, you're going to be giving absolutely wrong answers, right? Absolutely wrong answers. There are some questions that are two in one, like I said, like the question I just read about giving financial justification to reasons or using financial argument to persuade the organization to implement our recommendation, forklift and to segregate forklift for pedestrians. Now, most people actually are saying just go straight to the financial argument, right? They forget that they are supposed to use that financial argument to get something. So when I say something like financial arguments are the direct and indirect cost in your module 1.1, and when I say something like the sick pay, medical costs, legal costs, first things first, you know that one word answers are not accepted. Apart from that, if I just go ahead to say that the organization might incur medical costs as a result of workers being injured, that does not answer my question. That's half of the question. The question is, get financial reasons, use those financial reasons to get them to implement segregation. So you can start by saying segregating the forklift trucks from the pedestrians will help avoid a reoccurrence of accidents, because one already happened in the scenario, as this incident could lead to medical cost or medical implications or financial medical cost, however you want to put it, to the organization. The idea is, what I've done is I brought out my financial argument. I also brought out the fact that I'm going to use it to get them to segregate pedestrians from forklift. Incident or accident can lead to workers being away from work for a very long period of time, and it could also, which would mean that they would require continuous sick pay without working for the organization, without productivity. This could simply be avoided by making sure that we implement the control to segregate forklift trucks from workers. So do not forget that forklift truck and workers aspect of that question. This idea can be used in different questions. For that particular question, you can get away, because some of your financial costs could lead to, discussing these things in general. However, if you do not do that for other questions where they have like two parts to the question, you might not be able to get the mark at all. So read the question fully. Don't just look at the question, see one thing and then run away with it. No, make sure that the question is not trying to ask you for more than one thing. In fact, assume that every question is trying to hide something. I keep saying that. Assume that every question is trying to hide something. Why? Because the idea of this open book exam is you need to know that your examiner and the person that set the question, they know you have your books, they know you have the internet, they ask you to use it. So that means that they're expecting, they have a need for them to twist your questions, twist your scenarios. That's the only thing they have going for them. They can't hide the answers from you. You have them. What they can do is waste your time trying to decipher the questions, trying to understand the scenario. But once you do all of this, The answer is looking at you, like right in your face. All you need to do is apply. So that's the only thing that your examiner has going for him. The fact that he can hide the questions he can put an exam into these questions themselves. So the question serves as an exam, but then they put the little trick, riddles, and all that into your question. So you have to be very, very careful with that part. Also, okay, so for the question, you want to make sure you understand the question to avoid giving wrong answers. You want to make sure that you're not answering half of the question, right? If you understand the question well, it would also help you to determine the length at which your examiner expects you to give your answer, how well your examiner wants you to talk about the different points. Also, for the question, every question has a mark allocated. When we talk about point management, we'll talk more about how to work towards that maximum marks. But every question has a mark awarded right in front of it in brackets. And you should know by now that 1 point gets you 1 mark. So you need to make sure that you know that mark, and then in relation to that, deliver your answers as appropriate. So far we've talked about making sure you understand the scenario, and then after breaking the scenario down, understanding the question, by the time you infuse these two things, you're already halfway through your exam, and we're already halfway through my 5 tips. Okay, so the very next tip I have is, my next tip is point management. This is one of the few reasons why you're watching this video, and point management could also really affect your marking. I've seen people that actually, as a result of laziness, I think, sometimes the fact that they just did not read the instructions or haven't been following for the requirement, they have everything. They've done the first 2 things. They understand the scenario, they understand the question, they've seen the marks allocated. However, they're not able to provide sufficient information to maximize this marks that they have. See, it's better if you do not understand or know the question, and then you get short of marks, than when you actually do understand and know the question, but then by yourself, you short yourself of marks. So what we're going to discuss now around point management is how to make sure you maximize this information. So when you have questions from, simple questions, what are the importance of this, the advantages of that, what is safety culture, these are marks that if they give them 20, we should make sure that we're taking 20 at least, or no matter how the examiner wants to look at it, max minimum of 18. So you have enough point for this. Make sure you follow up. Now, why people fall short of marks for this kind of questions, and all questions in general, is one, because they're not writing enough, right? So we said that every question has marks allocated. Now, when a question says 10 marks, it means you need 10 correct points. If you have written less than 10 points, you cannot get up to 10 marks. And remember that less than 10 points you've written, not all of them would be correct. So you've already short of yourself automatically of a few. While marking, they might also mark you wrong for a few. So that means that you just keep shorting yourself of marks. So it's better you even write more than 10. So whatever happens, the examiner can always take from the remaining that you've written, maybe 12. Additional 2 points where you have, so that it can make up for any other issues that you have. The second problem that people face with point management is the repetition of points. So you talk about competence, for example. After discussing proper competence, you now say that the workers should also have enough experience. They're required to also have enough knowledge and all of that. You're repeating the same point. All of these things gets you 1 point. So for competence, I can actually just say competence, or I can bring 2 points out of competence. Training can be explained different from something like experience. It's not the same thing. However, training comes with knowledge, Training comes with skills even. I can explain those differently. So I can manage my point that way, or I put everything in one. However, even if I change the English around it, so some people just they change the English around it. So workers should have enough confidence to do this. You go to another place, there should be enough courage to work, something like that. You're just repeating the same thing, and the examiner is going to find that out. So I'm going to discuss how to not do or make these mistakes. I'm still on point management. Sometimes you're not giving full details for each of your points. So they ask you for 10 points, you've given 10 points. But for some of your points, or maybe even all of your points, you're not giving full details. I always say that this is what is in your head, or you're thinking about, and then this is what you're writing. You need to know that the examiner is not marking that one that is in your head. The examiner can only mark what they see in front of them. So if you do not take your time to pull down everything that is in your head, you're not going to be able to convince the examiner. Okay, so for example, I'm talking about pain and suffering as a moral argument. The workers are going to go through pain and suffering when an accident happens in the workplace. Now, that's the moral reason. But if I stop there without saying how that would be an impact to the family and friends, how that can be an impact to the workers themselves, and how this impact can affect their productivity, the morale of other workers, have not brought that moral reason aspect. I've not gotten to the part where I discuss the moral reasons, right? If they ask me that, what are the steps to a risk assessment? And I discuss identifying assets. How does it help my risk assessment? What are the importance of ISO management system? I discuss one importance, but do not relate it to the management system. They ask me to discuss the culture of an organization. I discuss different points, but I do not discuss how it determines the polarity of the culture of that organization. How does it make it positive? How does it make it negative? So you have to make sure that you use this point clearly, and then you give everything you have for every point, everything you have. Make sure that you read the point back to yourself, and there's no why. There's no, what are you trying to say here? There's no, okay, so it has to be everything you have for each point. So if it says 10 marks, everything you have in 10 different occasions for 10 different points in 10 different paragraphs. That way, your examiner has no further questions for you. If that point is correct, you're definitely going to get the mark because you've written everything you have as regards that particular point. You're linked to the scenario where possible, further explanations where possible. So everything you have. If you do not do that, you are going to be shorting yourself. And don't worry about the word count. Not initially. Give your answers everything you have. If you stick to going straight to the answers and giving everything you have, and you're not writing excessively in terms of paraphrasing, so they ask you a question about safety culture, and then you've used 200 words to define safety culture without going into the question itself. In most cases, you don't even need to have a paraphrase. Just go straight to answering the question in different paragraphs, and you might have a very, very short one just to set a pace for your answers. But remember that that paraphrase has no marks awarded to it. So be very, very careful with that. Also, for your point management and then issues with word count, I will talk more about managing your word count later when I get to the answering pattern, and then making sure that your point eats. Okay, so make sure that your for your point management, you have full details for each point. Like I said, avoid repetition. Ensure that your points are made when you give this full details, so that you can get the marks. Now, still on point management, there's a technique that I see as being very effective so far to avoid this repetition of point, and that is making sure that before you start putting your answers down in your answer booklet, or what you're going to give details of your answers, look for a rough piece of paper and list out your answers. So when they ask me a question, I list out my answers. They ask me a question that, what are the factors that I'm going to consider when I want to select contractors in a contract B? I'm going to list out those contracts. I will select I will check their competence. I will check for the competence of their workers, their certification. Do they have a policy, the incident rates in that organization, legislations and enforcement actions against them, their previous clients. I will list out this point. Now, what's the benefit of that? These points, this one word answers cannot be my question. I need to work on them. Now, working on them is what I do in my answer booklet. But if I have 10 different points listed or 12 different points listed for each question, when I start discussing this question, I'll talk about how to discuss them, linking to the scenario and where relatable in my next tip. But when I start listing them differently, explain them differently, I'm not going to be able to repeat the same point. I won't say the same thing about policy in this case as I will say about incident rate, because I can tell that I'm discussing different points. However, if I just try to go off the top of my head and then as I'm racking my brain, I try to give answers, there's a likelihood that number 5 question answer might be very, very similar or even the same thing, just choice of words from the first one. But remember that the examiner is not marking how fancy your English is or how well you can describe things. No, it's still an exam and the examiner is marking point, syllabus point. The way you use the point is how you get your mark entirely, but there has to be a point in the first place. So if you've been awarded a mark for that point before, there's no way you're going to get a new mark because you described the same point differently. So this is very important when we talk about point management. Be very, 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 very careful of that. Okay, so let me just chip in the word count really quickly. I see people always trying to ask questions about word count. How do we manage word count? Some people always say that they've been taught to stick with 300 word counts per question. Remember, the question count might not even be 10 questions. So just leave all this mathematics, go straight to answering your questions. And then when you're done, look at your word count, see if it's even up to 3,000 in the first place. Now, there's a maximum, the recommendation is 3,000 plus or minus. That is your recommended 2,700 words. There's no minimum actually, but the examiners recommend 2,700 words, and they also mandate, this is where the penalty comes in, that you should not exceed 3,300 words. Now, note that on your answer template, every other thing that is on your answer template before you started putting your answers is not part of your word count. So if you look at the answer template, there's a section before your references or right after where they tell you the number of words already in that template. So you can minus that from your word count. That's why I also advise that you do your work in a separate Word document first, so you know your actual word count before you transfer. Also note that your references, the list of your references, is not part of your word count. Just your answers to this question that is regarded as your word count. Now, the penalty is that any other word after the 3,300 word is not going to be regarded as part of your exam. But really, are you even going to get to 3,300? That's a lot of words. If you stick to answering the question and you're not dilly-dallying, gallivanting, you would see that even 3,000 words is not beans at all if you're writing what you're asked and you're not just using unnecessary stories. So how to make sure that you're effective also with the word count, because you have to be conscious, is avoid repeating things over and over again. Say for every point you're saying, you say based on the scenario, according to the scenario. You know, these three words, repeating. By the time you do that 10 times, that's about 30 words already. So you don't have to tell the examiner you're stating based on the scenario. Just reference it, right? Just say the incident where the worker broke their leg. Obviously, the incident was in the scenario, so I don't have to say the incident in the scenario, because in that case, I keep saying that over and over again. And also, I've seen cases where in the scenario, people actually an incident in the scenario or a paragraph in the scenario, a sentence in the scenario. When they want to reference it, they lift everything word for word. No, you can paraphrase. So it was an accident, I can say that the accident that led to the worker breaking their leg, not when the forklift was reversing, all of that. No. You could just paraphrase it, because the examiner is not marking your scenario. The examiner is marking your understanding of your points, right? That's my magic tip that is coming at my number 5 tip. Okay, so let's stick with the word count. So avoid these repetitions and make sure that you reduce your paraphrasing. Like I said, just go straight to answering the question, and then do not forget the tips so far. So far we've had 3 tips. We've had understanding the scenario and deciphering the questions. We've had proper point management, which is the third one. Now we're going to the fourth point. Now the fourth point, it follows. It follows. So it's like an hierarchy, right? You start from understanding the scenario, you go to the question, and then you go to managing your point, and then you go to delivering your point, right? Making sure you have all this ready as you're cooking your answer recipe. Okay, now so for the delivery of point, now, you must have noticed that there are 2 ways, regardless of how the question comes, that your examiner wants you to answer the question. Either they want you to answer the question based on the scenario only, or they want you to link to the scenario where applicable. Now, one thing you need to know is whichever way the answer comes, the question comes, or that requirement comes, you're not expected to start bringing answers outside the scenario. Now, I see that there's this misunderstanding to that aspect. So you think when they say that the answer should be where applicable, it means you can like go away from the scenario entirely. No, your answers still have to come within that organization, that industry. It just means that you're allowed to, assume a few things, right? You're allowed to make assumptions. You're allowed to insinuate. I keep using those 2 words. So, for example, if I want to talk about the safety culture of an organization, and the question says, based on the scenario only, I think this is a very good example. If the question says based on the scenario only, it means every safety culture indicator I use must have been discussed, in that scenario. No assumption. For example, workers' complaints is an indicator of safety culture, either positive or negative, right? So if workers are complaining excessively, it means they have it's a negative indicator of safety culture. If in that scenario, they didn't talk about workers' complaints, either being excessive or not, and the question says based on the scenario only, don't use workers' complaint at all, because the question is saying based on the scenario only. Now, if the question says where applicable, it means I can say, the number of near misses and the fact that workers are already said that the management is rare means that they've been complaining about working conditions. That is, I just assume that circumstances around that scenario could mean that they could have been complaining. So it's not as if I'm going away from the scenario entirely, but my answer doesn't have to be based on the scenario only. I can make assumptions. But when your scenario is the construction industry, you now start linking to manufacturing industry, or you link to aviation industry, you've gone away from your exam. Your exam is still about the scenario, right? But then sometimes you would be forced to only bring answers that can be found in the scenario, that proof can be found in the scenario to back them up. However, in some cases, you can have generic proof. Okay, like the exam about the pandemic. The first question was about the gap. How would they manage workers that are working from home? Now they ask us to do this where applicable. So in that case, I can talk about ergonomics of the workers. I can talk about the fact that the workers need to have a proper structure. When it comes to working from home, they need to have knowledge of trip hazards, all of these things that they might not be aware of in their houses. But these things were not mentioned in the scenario. I could only use these as answers to the question because it says where applicable. But if you notice, while I was giving my answers, I was still talking about that organization. So you need to be very careful with that. Some people think that when they say we're applicable, it means that all of the answers are getting somewhere. So at the back of your mind, know that everything you're doing is about that organization. Your entire exam is about that organization. Your entire questions are about the organization. So your answers should also be about the organization. Okay? So I hope that explanation does justice. If it doesn't, you can ask questions in the comment section, so I would see how better I can explain. And if not, I could just refer you to my guide at the top, which in this case is your the learner's guide. And talking about that, there's a document out. Only one examiner's feedback is out here. They always give an examiner's feedback after every exam. It won't give you all the answers you need, like answer the question, but it will give you likely answers and the major mistakes that delegates have made, candidates have made, and how the examiner expected those answers to be phrased. So go grab that document. You can find it on the Nebosh website, and if not, you could also contact me to see if I could share that document with you. It also could be a last minute help alongside all the steps that I am giving. So you have to be very, very careful with your point delivery. Make sure that your point delivery is in line with the organization that we are talking about, right? Okay, and then still based on point delivery, this is why I tell you that one word answers are not applicable. One line answers should also not be used. Make sure that you deliver your point, just like I said before, giving enough information. So because they say what's safety, what do I think about the safety culture of the organization? Does not mean that I can say that there was a decrease, there was less absenteeism, there was more accidents. No, those things are not sufficient. You have to tell me how that relates. How does it relate to the scenario? Deliver your point properly, right? Deliver it properly, exceptionally. Make sure that you also deliver your point using safety terminologies, right? Use safety terminologies. Use your acronyms where possible. I'm talking about the use of acronyms. You can use acronyms, but only accepted acronyms. And if you're going to use acronyms, make sure that at the beginning of your work or before that particular answer, you first use the full meaning. Remember, do not develop your own acronym. If you're not sure if it's an accepted acronym, do away with it. But for things like SSW, acronyms in the syllabus, your JSAs, your PTW, these are acronyms that you already have in your syllabus. But PPE, before you use them, make sure that you write them in full. So if I was going to use PPE consecutively in my work, I would first write personal protective equipment, and then I go ahead to put PPE in brackets. So every other answer follows, I can use PPE. So that could also help to minimize your word count actually. But then make sure that you're only using accepted abbreviations. If you're not sure, do not abbreviate at all. Don't develop your own abbreviation. Okay. So still on point delivery, I already said you should understand the difference between linking to the scenario and then when they say based on the scenario only, when it is applicable. Know that every answer is expecting you, or every question is expecting you to relate your answer to the scenario. Okay. So that's the fourth point. Before I go to my ultimate point, my very last point, one thing I also want you to know is I want you to, after answering the question, because you're rushing, remember that this exam is going to take you 24 hours. Give it a ticket. Even if you know the answer, you will see it. You know the answer immediately as you. Even if you get the best of all scenario questions, because you could be lucky, right? What's the word to use? I don't want to use quantity, but let me just go with that for now. The quantity or the explanation that your examiner is expecting, the magnitude of answers that they're expecting alone itself, just writing the answer. Forget the time you spend understanding the scenario, the time you spend understanding, that could take you like 10, 12 hours. It could, it's possible. So, except you just want to rush through, which is not advisable. They give you 24 hours, use the 24 hours. And when you are done, also make sure that you review your work. But in most cases, we're also lazy reviewers. So, for example, my own work, when I write a book, an article rather, I need an editor. Because I was saying that when I try to edit my work, I read the mistake as if you were correct. So I read what is in my head and not what is right there when I try to review my own work. But if it was reviewing someone else's work, it's very easy for me to point out mistakes. So if you are that kind of person, you're going to have to, I'm talking about grammatical errors and every other type of errors also. For grammatical errors, we have applications that can help you. Google Docs, Grammarly, all these applications, even Microsoft itself could help you to an extent, but you could also try all these other advanced apps or that you could use to help you, delivering your a point and any kind of grammatical error. See, your examiner is not marking good English and all that. But however, if you have more than in one paragraph, you've had like a lot of grammatical errors, it will actually affect the picture of the entire picture. So the examiner is not marking was instead of is or as instead of as and all that. So, but by the time you now have like 4-3 of that in one paragraph, then the entire idea changes. You confuse the examiner, and a confused examiner is really not good for. It's not good for a delegate. So you have to be very, very careful. With that, and that could also help. And time management, you have 24 hours, so depending on the question, for each question you can even just review as you do them. And then also for your own exam psychology, when you get the questions, 5 questions, 10 questions, 6 questions, attempt the ones you know first, right? Attempt the ones you know, not the ones you're looking for the answers or anything. No. Attempt the ones that you know first. That would also give you ginger. So by the time you get to the field that you don't know, you can rest and then find some food to eat before you now start sourcing for different information and however you want to go about, deciphering this question. But the ones that are straightforward that you are really sure of, don't forget the first 4 tips. You got that line. But the ones that you've passed through all of these tips for, do those ones first before you now start looking out for the ones. I think by the time you even answer those questions, you would understand what they're expecting. So what is left would be what they're expecting for those particular questions. So it will make it easy for you to understand. However, if you start the other way around, because it's question number 1, you want to answer it, it could demoralize you. So you have to be very, very careful with that. Remember that in your answer sheet, you just put the answers where they belong. It doesn't matter which one you did first when you did it, right? Your examiner is not monitoring you. You're doing it outside. You're not on camera, so you have the opportunity to do that. Okay, so that's basically that. And then I think we could go to our major and number 5 point right about now. Okay, so now my 5th point is the major point. How do you write your answers? What is your examiner expecting from you when you deliver the answer? See, I can actually make a video talking about the different past questions, giving you my own perspective of the question, but that's only going to make me seem smart to you because you're going to get your own scenario, right? Not from the previous scenario. So what you need more is actually understanding how to deliver your answer. What is the answering technique, which is my number 5 tip? What is the answering technique? You understand the scenario, you understand the question, you already have an idea of how to manage your point, you know how to work on delivery, what they're expecting. But what is the actual answering technique? How do I structure my answer? What is my examiner expecting from me? I already know the answer. He knows that I know the answer. I have found the answer. But what is he expecting from me as a technique? How should I write it for my examiner? Okay, so I'm going to make it as simple as possible. Now, this is what is happening for this style of exam, right? You're going to be using answers. Now, we're assuming that you already have your answers, right? We're looking at the technique. How do you write it? Now, you already have the answers to the questions, right? What you're doing is you're going to be using those answers. You're going to be linking them appropriately to subject matters in this scenario. Also, you're going to be discussing that answer. So your examiner is not interested in The moral reasons, for example, are duty of care, societal expectations fulfilling, staff morale boosting, reputation of the organization, providing a safe place of work. Okay, they know these things are in your book, right? They're not expecting you. That's why they say they don't want one-line answers or one answers. If a question asks me for my moral argument about an organization, I don't have to say the duty of care. I could just say that as an organization, we have the responsibility to ensure that our workers are not at risk or they are not subjected to activities that put them at risk of injuries or ill health. What I have just done is giving you my understanding of the concept of duty of care. Then I now go forward to link to the scenario. So I say something like the absence of proper PPE, for example, or the provision of proper PPE is against this duty, this moral obligation that every organization has. Every employee has responsibility to ensure their own safety and the safety of other employees. I'm talking about the duty of care from one employee to another employee here, but I don't have to say duty of care. I give you my understanding of that point, right? And then I link to the scenario. The unsafe practice of that employee may, in this case, I have to state that practice because you have a scenario is against it. So basically what I'm trying to say is you get your answer. Once you have your answer, that general answers, that syllabus answers I told you about, one by one, in your own words, discuss that answer. Relating it to the scenario is where you now infuse it, where you bring it to the exam itself. So first you have the answer, show your examiner that you know what you're talking about as regards the answer, defend it, and then use a link from the scenario. Tell us why that is your answer first, and then bring something from the scenario to back it up. That is your answering technique. Now, why is this important? This is important because you can actually have the right answers, but you will not be able to deliver it properly to fit into the answering technique. Okay, so there's this general example that I use. If you've been in my class, and when it comes to this OBE answering, I said it's something that you can actually know from looking at, you can talk about, but when it comes to writing it down, giving the answering technique, you might not be so you might not be able to, maximize that answer that you have, or it might not even belong to that scenario or that particular question at all. For example, I always say that imagine I go to a school to consult, and then they ask me to help them with emergency procedural equipment, and then I say that they might need to buy life jackets. See, life jackets, if my question was, give me examples of emergency procedure equipment or equipment for emergency procedures. A life jacket is an equipment for emergency procedures in case you have a man go overboard, if you are even just, you're on a canoe, a speedboat, let alone a vessel. It's an emergency and procedure equipment. But in this case, in this scenario, which is a school, it really doesn't add up, except that school is on board a vessel in the middle of the ocean. Apart from that, it doesn't add up. So when you don't use your answers properly with the right technique, you don't select the right answers and then use the right technique, it just feels like you're recommending a lifeboat for or a life jacket rather for a school that is literally on the land. So you have to know these answering techniques. So after you go through all these tips and you have the right answer to the question, the next thing you should do is take a deep breath. Each of those questions, try to give your own explanation and then just end it with a link to the scenario. So for example, I was talking about financial reason. I think I did justice to that already. So let's say my point is the reputation of the organization, right? So my understanding of reputation is just the same thing as goodwill. So now incident and accident in organization will diminish the public image, the goodwill of the organization. And in turn, that would affect the profit of that organization. It would affect the clientele. It could lead to total loss of business. And this can be avoided by simply segregating forklift trucks from workers. going back to my forklift truck question. So what is your understanding of that answer, and how does it fit into this comprehension we have given you, this scenario that we are giving you? That is the key. That is the key that you need to have at the back of your mind. So stay patient. Do this one after the other. If you need a break, take a break. It's better to be stressed out for 24 hours than being stressed out for just 12, and then you still get a refer, and then you complete your 24 hours with the next 12. In fact, you might even need to now spend 36 hours in the next one if they allow you. So just give it everything that it needs. And I hope that these few points I've been able to break it down enough to help you when you want to attempt the different exam questions that you're going to get. So don't forget, still buttressing my answering pattern point, you ask yourself why is this the answer to the question before you start writing it. You listed the answers, so why is it the answers? Why is that the answer to the question? So for example, they ask me like I said before, what are the benefits of communication? So I say that it would there is let's say that one of the benefits of communication could be to include workers. It could be a form of involvement of workers. So now why is involving workers, why is that important? And also, if workers are communicated where it would be a way to involve the workers. And when workers feel involved in safety procedures and assessment, they have a sense of responsibilities to this procedure. So basically, why is that the answer to my question? We talked about selecting contractors, for example. I said I would check their policy. Why am I checking the policy? I'm checking the policy to make sure that they do have a policy, to make sure that their policy is in line with whatever processes that they have. They have aims and objectives. These things are not, their policy is not too general. Their policy is specific to their organization. Any of these points would actually suffice, right? So I don't have to write all of these things. I can write one or two if I want, since policy is one point. Whatever I write about policy, I can't write it about any other point. We talked about point management. So I write as much as I can about policy. And then I go to the next one, which is incident rate, or whatever point I pick. I write as much as I can about incident rate. And then I go to the next one like that. So make sure that you ask yourself, why? Why have I selected this as an answer? The answer to that why is what you first put down, and then you now include the link to the scenario. So basically, I hope this video has helped. It's already going close to 1 hour. I hope I didn't bore you through this video. I hope it's very effective in helping you. And so if you have any questions now, please put it down after your exams. If this video did help you, I want you to come back and then, give me the good news and also help encourage other people to watch the video. So do well to subscribe, like, and share. And hopefully I will hear from you when you finally do pass the exam. Thank you very much. Once again, a brief introduction. My name is Kayode Eti. I am a freelance trainer consultant. I am also the manager of Top Class Training Institutes. We are located in Dubai, but we have a branch in Nigeria. So if you want to do any trainings in Nigeria or the UAE in general, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Sharjah, we have you covered. If you want us to train your organizations, not just certification trainings, we do actual trainings for your workers. We do management trainings. We help with document development. We also help with ISO management system implementations. We could also help you with documentations in preparations for internal audit, surveillance audit, everything you need. I also offer freelance security policy development, implementations of security system, security risk assessment in your workplace also. Okay. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this video.